The dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the attic window as Sarah Thompson climbed the creaking wooden stairs of her grandmother's house in Cedar Falls, Iowa. It was March 2013, and she had come to sort through decades of memories after her grandmother's passing. At 55 years old, Sarah thought she had made peace with the tragedy that had defined her life 27 years earlier. But hidden in a dusty cardboard box marked Christmas, Decorations 1985. Sarah was about to discover something that would shatter everything she thought she knew about the most devastating day of her life. Something that would prove the nightmare that began on June 23, 1986, was far more sinister than anyone had ever imagined. What Sarah found in that box, documents that had been deliberately hidden for nearly 3 decades, would reopen one of Iowa's most heartbreaking missing children cases and reveal a web of deception that reached into the very heart of her own family. The discovery would finally answer the question that had tormented her for 27 years. What really happened to Emma, Sophia, and Isabella Rodriguez on that sunny June afternoon when 3 7-year-old triplets simply vanished without a trace? Before we uncover this shocking revelation, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit that notification bell, because today's story will take you through one of the most complex and emotionally devastating cases in missing children history. This is a story about a mother's unwavering love, a community's desperate search, and a secret so dark that it was buried for nearly 3 decades. This is the story of 3 little girls who disappeared on the last day of school, and the discovery that would finally bring the truth to light after 27 years of unanswered questions, false hope, and heartbreak that seemed to have no end. In 1986, Sarah Thompson was 28 years old and raising her 7-year-old triplet daughters as a single mother in the tight-knit community of Cedar Falls, Iowa. Standing 5'6" with shoulder-length auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to sparkle when she smiled, Sarah worked double shifts as a nurse at Covenant Medical Center to provide for her 3 precious daughters. Her co-workers often marveled at how she managed to maintain such grace under pressure, showing up to work each morning with a bright smile despite the exhaustion that came with being the sole provider for 3 energetic children. Sarah had moved to Cedar Falls when the girls were just 2 years old, seeking a fresh start after their father abandoned the family without warning or explanation. She chose the small Iowa city specifically because it felt safe, the kind of place where children could ride their bikes without fear, where neighbors knew each other's names, and where the most serious crime was usually a stolen bicycle or teenage pranks. The triplets, Emma, Sophia, and Isabella Rodriguez, were identical in appearance, but completely unique in personality, a fact that delighted their mother and fascinated everyone who met them. All 3 girls had inherited their mother's striking features: thick, dark brown hair that fell in natural waves to their shoulders, bright hazel eyes that seemed to change color in different light, and olive-toned skin that tanned beautifully in the Iowa summers. Emma Rodriguez, the eldest by exactly 3 minutes, was the natural leader of the trio. At 7 years old, she stood just over 4 feet tall and possessed a confidence that seemed remarkable for her age. Emma was the one who spoke up when someone was being unfair, who organized elaborate games during recess, and who invariably ended up as the spokesperson when the 3 girls found themselves in trouble. Her second-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, often said that Emma had the makings of a future lawyer or politician. She could argue her point with remarkable logic and rarely backed down from what she believed was right. Sophia Rodriguez, born 6 minutes after Emma, was the dreamer of the family. While physically identical to her sisters, Sophia moved through the world with a gentleness that set her apart. She was the child who rescued injured birds, who spent hours drawing elaborate pictures of fairy tale castles, and who could often be found reading books far beyond her grade level. Sophia had a way of seeing beauty in everything around her, from the patterns that frost made on windows to the way sunlight filtered through leaves. She was also the most empathetic of the three, often comforting classmates who were upset and showing a maturity that sometimes startled adults. Isabella Rodriguez, the youngest by 9 minutes, was pure energy and mischief. She was the athlete of the trio, the first to master riding a bicycle, the fastest runner in her class, and the one most likely to come home with scraped knees and dirt under her fingernails. Isabella had an infectious laugh that could brighten any room and a fearlessness that both thrilled and terrified her mother. While Emma was arguing and Sophia was daydreaming, Isabella was usually climbing something she shouldn't, or attempting some physical feat that seemed impossible for someone so small. Despite their different personalities, the three girls were inseparable. They had developed their own secret language as toddlers, a mixture of English, Spanish words they had picked up from their father's family, and invented terms that only they understood. They insisted on wearing matching outfits to school every day, though they each added their own personal touches. Emma always wore a small silver bracelet their mother had given her. Sophia carried a worn stuffed rabbit named Mr. Whiskers, and Isabella invariably had at least one bandage somewhere on her body from her latest adventure. Their home on Maple Street was a modest two-bedroom house with a large backyard where the girls spent countless hours playing elaborate games that could last for days. Sarah had converted the dining room into a bedroom for herself, giving the girls the master bedroom, which they had decorated with posters of their favorite cartoon characters and a collection of books that seemed to grow weekly thanks to Sarah's belief that reading was the key to their future success. The family's routine was carefully orchestrated around Sarah's work schedule and the girls' school activities. Mornings began at 6:30 a.m. when Sarah would wake the girls with gentle tickling and the promise of their favorite breakfast, pancakes shaped like animals. The 15-minute walk to Cedar Falls Elementary School was a daily adventure, with the girls racing ahead, falling back to walk with their mother, and pointing out every interesting thing they saw along the familiar route. After school, the girls would walk the 6 blocks, home together, a journey that usually took 20 minutes because they stopped to pet every dog, examine every interesting rock, and wave to the elderly neighbors who had grown to love watching the trio pass by each afternoon. Sarah had drilled into them the importance of staying together, never talking to strangers, and coming straight home where they would have snacks and work on homework before she returned from her shift at the hospital. Evenings were sacred family time. Sarah would help with homework, listen to stories about their day, and read to them before bed. The girls shared one large bed by choice, despite having bunk beds available, and they would whisper and giggle long after lights out. Sarah often stood in their doorway, watching them sleep and feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for these 3 perfect little beings who had made her life so much richer. In June 1986, everything about their life felt safe, predictable, and filled with promise. The girls were excited about summer vacation. Sarah had been promoted to head nurse in her department, and they were planning their first real vacation, a trip to Disneyland that Sarah had been saving for since the girls were born. None of them could have imagined that their perfect little world was about to be shattered in a way that would change everything forever. Monday, June 23, 1986, dawned bright and warm over Cedar Falls, Iowa, with temperatures reaching a pleasant 72 degrees by mid-morning. It was the last day of the school year at Cedar Falls Elementary, and the excitement among the children was palpable as they anticipated the freedom of summer vacation that lay just hours ahead. Sarah Thompson had started her morning shift at Covenant Medical Center at 6 o'clock a.m., leaving the girls with their usual breakfast of animal-shaped pancakes and detailed instructions about their day. Before leaving for work, she had hugged each daughter, individually, reminding them to walk straight home together after school, and promising that they would celebrate the start of summer vacation with pizza and a movie that evening. The girls had been unusually excited that morning, chattering about their plans for the summer and the upcoming trip to Disneyland that Sarah had been promising them for months. Emma had insisted on wearing her favorite yellow sundress with white flowers, while Sophia chose an identical dress in light blue, and Isabella opted for the same style in pink. Each girl wore white sandals and carried a small backpack containing their final school projects and the handful of personal items they were allowed to bring home. At Cedar Falls Elementary School, the day proceeded exactly as planned. Mrs. Patterson, the girls' second-grade teacher, later recalled that all three Rodriguez sisters had been well-behaved and attentive during the morning lessons, though their excitement about summer vacation was evident in their frequent whispered conversations and barely contained giggles. The school held a special assembly at 2:00 p.m. to mark the end of the academic year, with Principal Robert Hayes addressing the students about summer reading programs and fall registration. During the assembly, several teachers noticed Emma, Sophia, and Isabella sitting together in the third row, whispering and pointing at the colorful decorations that had been hung around the gymnasium for the occasion. At exactly 3:20 p.m., the final bell rang, releasing 847 students into the warm June afternoon. Mrs. Patterson watched from her classroom window as the Rodriguez triplets walked together toward the main exit, Emma carrying her own backpack plus a poster she had made for their mother, Sophia clutching Mr. Whiskers and helping Isabella with her science project, and Isabella skipping alongside her sisters with her characteristic boundless energy. The girls were seen leaving the school grounds at 3:23 p.m. by crossing guard volunteer Margaret Wilson, who had been working that intersection for 6 years and knew all the regular walkers by name. Margaret later told investigators that the girls had seemed completely normal, happy, chattering excitedly, and walking in their usual formation with Emma slightly ahead, Sophia in the middle, and Isabella bringing up the rear while examining something she had found on the ground. The route from Cedar Falls Elementary to their home on Maple Street was exactly 6 blocks, and typically took the girls between 18 and 25 minutes, depending on how many interesting discoveries they made along the way. The path was straightforward, 4 blocks south on Cedar Street, then 2 blocks west on Maple Street to their house at number 427. At 3:31 p.m., postal worker Daniel Martinez saw the 3 girls walking south on Cedar Street near the intersection with 3rd Avenue. He waved from his mail truck, and all 3 girls waved back enthusiastically, a detail he remembered clearly because Isabella had been jumping up and down while waving, nearly dropping her science project in the process. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Emma, Sophia, and Isabella Rodriguez. At 3:45 p.m., Mrs. Helen Foster, an elderly neighbor who lived 2 houses down from the Thompson family, noticed that she hadn't seen the girls pass by her usual spot on the front porch where she watched for them every afternoon. Mrs. Foster had developed a routine of waving to the triplets as they walked home, and their absence was immediately noticeable to her. By 4:00 p.m., Sarah Thompson was beginning to feel the first stirrings of worry. She had called home from the hospital during her break, expecting to hear the girls' voices and their excited chatter about the last day of school. When no one answered the phone, she told herself they were probably in the backyard playing and couldn't hear the ring. When Sarah called again at 4:15 p.m. and still received no answer, the worry intensified into genuine concern. The girls had never failed to be home by 4:00 p.m. in the 2 years they had been walking home from school alone. They were responsible children who understood the importance of following their mother's rules, particularly the non-negotiable requirement that they come straight home and call her at work to confirm their safe arrival. At 4:30 p.m., unable to concentrate on her patients, Sarah called her neighbor Mrs. Foster and asked her to check on the girls. The elderly woman hurried to the Thompson house and found it exactly as Sarah had left it that morning. Doors locked, no signs that anyone had been there since she departed for work at 5:45 a.m. Mrs. Foster's report sent Sarah into a panic that she would later describe as unlike anything she had ever experienced. She immediately called the school, hoping against hope that the girls had somehow been detained or had gotten confused about dismissal procedures. Principal Hayes confirmed that all three girls had left the building with the rest of the students at the normal time, and that no unusual incidents had been reported during the day. By 4:45 p.m., Sarah had left work and was driving frantically through the neighborhoods between the school and their home, stopping anyone she saw to ask if they had seen three little girls in matching sundresses. The growing knot of terror in her stomach told her that something was terribly wrong. Her daughters would never voluntarily deviate from their routine or ignore her instructions about coming straight home. At 5:12 p.m., Sarah Thompson called the Cedar Falls Police Department to report her daughters missing. The desk sergeant who took the call initially suggested that the girls might have stopped at a friend's house or gotten distracted playing somewhere, but Sarah's desperation and her detailed explanation of her daughter's reliable routine convinced him to dispatch officers immediately. Officer Lisa Chen arrived at the Thompson residence at 5:28 p.m. and quickly realized that this was not a case of children simply losing track of time. The girls' beds were still neatly made from that morning, their summer clothes laid out for the next day exactly as they had left them, and their favorite snacks untouched in the kitchen. Everything about the scene suggested that Emma, Sophia, and Isabella Rodriguez had never made it home. As the sun began to set over Cedar Falls on that June evening, a mother's worst nightmare was becoming reality. Three 7-year-old girls had vanished somewhere between their elementary school and their home during a 6-block walk they had made safely hundreds of times before. The last anyone had seen of them was a postal worker's glimpse of three children in colorful sundresses, walking home from their last day of school with their entire summer stretching out before them. But as darkness fell on June 23, 1986, Emma, Sophia, and Isabella Rodriguez were nowhere to be found, and the search for three missing children was about to become the largest missing persons investigation in Cedar Falls history. Within 2 hours of Sarah's initial call to police, Cedar Falls had mobilized a search effort that would grow to include over 200 volunteers, multiple law enforcement agencies, and resources that stretched the small city's capabilities to their absolute limit. The disappearance of three children simultaneously, particularly triplets who were well known and beloved in the community, created an urgency that galvanized everyone who heard about the case. By 7:00 p.m. on June 23, Cedar Falls Police Chief Robert Williams had established a command center in the elementary school gymnasium and requested assistance from the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. The school's layout made it an ideal headquarters, with multiple phone lines, large spaces for volunteer coordination, and proximity to the point where the girls were last seen. The initial search focused on the 6-block route between the school and the Thompson home, with teams of volunteers walking every possible path the girls might have taken. Flashlights pierced the growing darkness as searchers checked every yard, every alley, every possible hiding spot where three small children might have sought shelter or been concealed. Search dogs arrived from Des Moines at 9:30 p.m., their handlers working through the night to track any scent trail from the school grounds. The dogs showed interest in several areas along Cedar Street, but lost the trail completely near the intersection with 4th Avenue, suggesting that the girls may have gotten into a vehicle at that location. Dr. Patricia Moore, a child psychologist who had worked on missing children cases throughout Iowa, arrived early Tuesday morning to interview Sarah Thompson and help investigators understand the girls' likely behavior patterns. Dr. Moore's assessment painted a picture of three responsible, intelligent children who were extremely close to their mother and unlikely to break established safety rules or go anywhere with strangers willingly. The Federal Bureau of Investigation officially joined the investigation on Wednesday, June 25, when the case met the criteria for suspected interstate kidnapping. Special Agent Michael Roberts, who specialized in crimes against children, took over as lead investigator and immediately expanded the search to include all of Iowa and surrounding states. Agent Roberts established several investigative priorities based on the evidence available. The fact that all three children had vanished simultaneously suggested either a carefully planned abduction or a situation where the children had encountered danger together and been unable to escape or call for help. The lack of any physical evidence along their walking route indicated that whatever had happened to them had occurred quickly and left no obvious traces. The investigation revealed disturbing statistics that heightened everyone's fears. In 1986, according to FBI data, children abducted by strangers had only a 15% chance of being recovered alive if they weren't found within the first 72 hours. With triplets, the psychological profile of potential abductors became more complex. Someone who would take three children at once was either extremely organized and dangerous, or was someone the children knew and trusted. Media attention exploded on Thursday, June 26th, when the story was picked up by national news networks. The image of three identical little girls in their colorful sundresses appeared on television screens across America, generating thousands of tips and reported sightings from 42 different states. Unfortunately, none of these leads proved credible upon investigation. Sarah Thompson became the public face of the search, appearing at press conferences with a composure that amazed everyone who saw her. Standing behind a podium filled with microphones, holding school photos of her daughters, she made emotional pleas for information while somehow maintaining the strength that investigators said was crucial for keeping hope alive. The investigation examined every aspect of the girls' lives, including Sarah's work, colleagues, the family's limited social circle, and even their absent father, whose whereabouts were eventually confirmed to be in California with no connection to the disappearance. Background checks were run on every teacher, staff member, and volunteer at Cedar Falls Elementary, with no suspicious findings. As the first week ended with no solid leads, the investigation expanded to include registered sex offenders within a 200-mile radius, analysis of unusual vehicle activity in the area on June 23rd, and interviews with every resident and business owner along the girls' walking route. The volunteer search effort continued daily, with community members taking time off work to comb through parks, wooded areas, abandoned buildings, and any location where three children might be hidden. The psychological toll on Sarah Thompson was evident to everyone involved in the case. She had taken indefinite leave from her nursing job to focus entirely on the search, sleeping only a few hours each night, and spending every waking moment either participating in search efforts or fielding calls from people claiming to have information about her daughters. By the end of June 1986, the investigation had generated over 800 tips, involved law enforcement from 12 different agencies, and cost the city of Cedar Falls more than $50,000 in overtime and resources. But despite the massive effort and unprecedented cooperation between agencies, Emma, Sophia, and Isabella Rodriguez remained missing, and their mother faced the horrifying possibility that she might never see her daughters again. The case that had begun with three little girls walking home from school had become a mystery that would haunt everyone involved for decades to come. As 1986 turned into 1987, the massive search effort for Emma, Sophia, and Isabella Rodriguez slowly began to wind down. But Sarah Thompson's desperate quest for answers had only just begun. The transition from active investigation to cold case status felt like a second death to Sarah. Not only had she lost her daughters, but now she was losing the hope that came with daily search efforts and constant police activity. Sarah never returned to her job at Covenant Medical Center. The familiar hallways and the concerned looks from colleagues who had watched her daughters grow up became unbearable reminders of the life she had lost. Instead, she threw herself into advocacy work, becoming a voice for missing children throughout Iowa, and eventually founding the Midwest Missing Children's Network in 1989. The small house on Maple Street became both a shrine and a torture chamber. Sarah kept the girls' bedroom exactly as they had left it on that final morning. Beds made, summer clothes laid out, Mr. Whiskers sitting on Sophia's pillow waiting for her return. Visitors often found Sarah sitting in the girls' room, reading aloud from their favorite books, or working on photo albums that she constantly updated with age progression images created by forensic artists. Every birthday was agony. Each May 15th, Sarah would buy 3 identical birthday cakes and place them on the kitchen table where the girls used to eat their animal-shaped pancakes. She would sing "Happy Birthday" in the empty house, blow out the candles for daughters who would have been 8, then 9, then 10, and watch the years accumulate like layers of grief that never quite healed. The false leads were perhaps the cruelest aspect of Sarah's ordeal. In 1991, a woman in Portland, Oregon, called police claiming to have seen 3 teenage girls who looked remarkably similar working at a local fast food restaurant. Sarah flew to Oregon immediately, her heart pounding with hope that she tried desperately to suppress. When the investigation revealed the girls were local teenagers with no connection to her case, Sarah spent 3 days in a Portland hotel room, sobbing with a despair so deep that she later said she understood why some people never recover from such disappointments. Similar false hopes occurred in 1994 when a security camera at a shopping mall in Denver captured images of 3 young women who bore a striking resemblance to age-progressed photos of the Rodriguez triplets. Sarah drove 18 hours straight to Colorado, only to discover that the women were college students from a local university who happened to be triplets themselves, but had no connection to her missing daughters. The advancement of DNA technology in the 1990s brought new hope and new heartbreak. Every time unidentified remains were discovered anywhere in the Midwest, Sarah would receive a call from law enforcement asking for DNA samples or dental records. Each negative result was both a relief and a crushing blow. Relief that her daughters hadn't suffered, but devastation that she still had no answers about their fate. Cedar Falls itself struggled to heal from the trauma of the disappearance. The elementary school installed new security measures and changed their dismissal procedures, while many parents began driving their children to and from school rather than allowing them to walk. Property values in the neighborhood around Maple Street declined, and several families moved away entirely, unable to bear the constant reminder of what had happened to the Rodriguez girls. Margaret Wilson, the crossing guard who had been the last person to see the girls, quit her volunteer position after 6 months and eventually moved to Florida. She told friends that she couldn't stop seeing those 3 little faces waving goodbye to her, and the guilt of not somehow preventing their disappearance consumed her daily thoughts. The case generated renewed attention periodically, particularly when similar child abduction cases occurred elsewhere in the country. In 1998, the 10-year anniversary brought a flurry of media coverage and new tips, but none proved substantial. The 20th anniversary in 2006 resulted in the case being featured on several national television programs about unsolved mysteries, generating over 400 new tips that took investigators 6 months to follow up on completely. Throughout the decades, Sarah's appearance changed dramatically. The vibrant 28-year-old nurse with auburn hair and sparkling green eyes became a gaunt woman with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held depths of sadness that seemed to reflect decades of unanswered questions. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it was the sort of smile that never quite reached her eyes, the smile of someone who had forgotten how genuine happiness felt. Sarah's extended family watched helplessly as she poured every aspect of her life into the search for her daughters. She never remarried, never had other children, and maintained minimal social relationships outside of her advocacy work. Her sister, Linda Thompson Clark, later said that it was as if Sarah had stopped living the day her daughters disappeared, existing instead in a state of suspended animation, waiting for answers that seemed destined never to come. By 2010, Sarah had become something of a legend in missing children advocacy circles. She had testified before Congress about the need for improved Amber Alert systems, had consulted on dozens of other missing children cases, and had helped establish protocols that were being used by law enforcement agencies across the country. But despite all her professional accomplishments in helping other families, she remained haunted by her inability to find her own daughters. The house on Maple Street, now paid off thanks to life insurance money from Sarah's parents, became a hub for missing children's advocacy. Sarah had converted the dining room into an office filled with filing, cabinets containing information about hundreds of missing children cases, maps marking potential sightings of her daughters, and correspondence with law enforcement agencies throughout North America. Neighbors often saw Sarah working late into the night, her silhouette visible through the office window as she pored over case files, updated databases, or corresponded with other parents who were living through their own nightmares. The woman who had once been known for her bright smile and infectious optimism had become a dedicated but deeply scarred warrior in the fight against child abduction. As 2013 began, Sarah Thompson was 55 years old and had spent more than half her life searching for answers about what had happened to Emma, Sophia, and Isabella. She had long since stopped expecting a miracle, but she had never stopped hoping for the truth. That hope was about to be rewarded in the most unexpected and devastating way imaginable. March 15, 2013, was an unusually warm day for early spring in Cedar Falls, with temperatures reaching 68 degrees, and the first crocuses beginning to emerge from the ground that had been frozen for months. Sarah Thompson stood in the driveway of her grandmother's house on Oak Street, keys trembling in her hands as she prepared to enter the home where she had spent countless childhood summers and holidays. Her grandmother, Dorothy Mae Thompson, had passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks earlier at the age of 93. Dorothy had been the matriarch of the Thompson family, the keeper of memories and traditions, and one of the few people who had never stopped believing that Emma, Sophia, and Isabella would somehow come home. Her death felt like the closing of another chapter in Sarah's long journey of loss. The house smelled of lavender and old furniture polish, scents that immediately transported Sarah back to her childhood. Dorothy had been meticulous about preserving family history, and every room contained carefully labeled boxes of photographs, documents, and memorabilia dating back to the early 1900s. Sarah had come to begin the overwhelming task of sorting through 93 years of accumulated memories. The attic access was through a narrow staircase off the second-floor hallway, and Sarah climbed slowly, her 55-year-old knees protesting the steep angle. The attic was larger than she remembered from childhood visits, with slanted ceilings and several small windows that provided just enough light to illuminate rows of carefully stacked boxes and furniture covered with white sheets. Sarah began systematically, starting with boxes near the stairs and working her way deeper into the space. Most contained exactly what their labels suggested: Christmas decorations, winter clothing, old photograph albums, and her grandfather's military uniforms from World War II. But when she reached a box marked Christmas Decorations, 1985, tucked far back under the eaves, something immediately struck her as odd. The box was heavier than it should have been for Christmas decorations, and when Sarah lifted the lid, she found not ornaments and garland, but a collection of manila envelopes, legal documents, and newspaper clippings that made her blood run cold. The first item she pulled out was a newspaper clipping from the Cedar Falls Courier, dated June 25, 1986, with the headline, "Search Continues for Missing Triplets," and a photograph of Emma, Sophia, and Isabella that Sarah recognized from their school pictures. But it was what lay beneath the newspaper clippings that stopped Sarah's world entirely. There were official documents from the Iowa Department of Human Services, legal papers bearing her grandmother's signature, and correspondence with attorneys that dated back to 1985, a full year before her daughters had disappeared. With shaking hands, Sarah unfolded a document titled Private Adoption Arrangement, and saw names that made absolutely no sense in the context of her life. Emma, Sophia, and Isabella Rodriguez were listed as subjects of voluntary placement with an adoptive family in Canada. The document was dated September 12, 1985, and bore the signatures of Dorothy Mae Thompson as legal guardian and a lawyer named Harrison Caldwell, whom Sarah had never heard of. The more documents Sarah pulled from the box, the more impossible and horrifying the picture became. There were bank statements showing payments of $50,000 deposited into her grandmother's account in monthly installments beginning in October 1985. There were letters from a family in Toronto, Michael and Catherine Pemberton, expressing their gratitude for the opportunity to provide a loving home for 3 special children who needed a fresh start. Most devastating of all was a handwritten letter from Dorothy to someone named Mrs. Patterson, but not the Mrs. Patterson who had been the girl's teacher. This Mrs. Patterson was apparently facilitating some kind of arrangement, and the letter contained details about the girls' personalities, their medical histories, and their adjustment challenges following their father's abandonment. Sarah found herself sitting on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by evidence of what appeared to be an elaborate conspiracy involving her own grandmother. The document suggested that Dorothy had somehow gained legal custody of the girls through forged paperwork and had arranged for their adoption by a Canadian family who believed they were legitimately adopting 3 children in need of homes. But the timeline made no sense. According to the documents, the adoption had been finalized in September 1985, yet Sarah had continued living with her daughters, caring for them, taking them to school, and planning their future together for 9 more months. The girls had disappeared in June 1986, not September 1985, and Sarah had never signed any documents giving up custody or authorizing any adoption proceedings. As Sarah continued reading, a more sinister picture began to emerge. There were references to the girls being temporarily relocated for their own safety, and mentions of concerns about Sarah's mental stability and ability to provide proper care. These characterizations bore no resemblance to the reality of their family life, and Sarah realized she was looking at evidence of a carefully constructed fraud designed to steal her children. The final document in the box was perhaps the most chilling. A handwritten note from Dorothy dated June 22, 1986, one day before the girls disappeared. The note read, "Tomorrow the arrangement will be completed. The children will be taken to their new family, and Sarah will finally be free to build a proper life for herself. This is for the best, even if she cannot understand it now." Sarah Thompson sat in her grandmother's attic, surrounded by evidence that the person she had trusted most in the world had orchestrated the disappearance of her daughters. The 27 years of searching, the false hopes, the investigations, the sleepless nights, all of it had been unnecessary, because the woman who had comforted her through her grief had been the architect of her nightmare. With trembling fingers, Sarah reached for her cell phone to call Detective James Wilson, who had taken over the cold case division and had been working with Sarah for the past 5 years. The conversation would be brief, but would set in motion a new investigation that would finally provide answers to questions that had tormented a mother for 27 years. The truth that Sarah had sought for so long was finally within reach, but it was a truth so devastating that she would later say she almost wished she had never found it. Detective James Wilson received Sarah Thompson's call at 3:47 p.m. on March 15, 2013, and within 6 hours, a joint task force involving the FBI, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation had been assembled. The documents Sarah discovered provided the first concrete leads the case had seen in 27 years, including specific names, addresses, and bank routing numbers that could be traced. The investigation moved with unprecedented speed. Within 72 hours, Canadian authorities had located the Pemberton family in Toronto. the couple who had unknowingly adopted Emma, Sophia, and Isabella through what they believed was a legitimate international adoption agency. Michael and Catherine Pemberton had raised the girls as their own daughters, never suspecting that the children had been stolen from a loving mother who had spent decades searching for them. The three women, now 34 years old, were living successful lives in Canada. Emma had become a pediatric nurse, Sophia worked as an elementary school teacher, and Isabella was a physical therapist. All three were married, and together they had given Sarah 7 grandchildren she had never known existed. They had grown up believing their birth mother had died in a car accident, and that they had been rescued from an orphanage. The reunion between Sarah and her daughters took place on April 2, 2013, in a conference room at the Toronto Police Headquarters. Detective Wilson later described it as the most emotionally intense moment he had witnessed in 30 years of law enforcement. The three women, who bore an unmistakable resemblance to the age progression photos Sarah had carried for decades, approached their biological mother with a mixture of curiosity, confusion, and overwhelming emotion. The criminal investigation revealed the full scope of Dorothy Thompson's deception. She had forged legal documents, created false identities for the girls, and worked with a network of corrupt adoption facilitators who specialized in providing children to wealthy families willing to pay premium prices for private arrangements. Dorothy had convinced herself that she was saving the girls from what she perceived as an inadequate life with a single mother. The most heartbreaking discovery was that Dorothy had kept detailed records of the girls' progress in Canada, including school photos, report cards, and letters from their adoptive parents. She had watched her granddaughters grow up from afar, while allowing her own daughter to suffer through 27 years of not knowing their fate. The case could not be prosecuted due to Dorothy's death and the statute of limitations, but it led to a comprehensive review of international adoption procedures and the closure of several fraudulent agencies. Sarah chose not to pursue civil litigation against the Pemberton family, recognizing that they too had been victims of Dorothy's elaborate deception. Today, Sarah maintains a careful relationship with her daughters, who struggle with the complex emotions of having two mothers who both genuinely love them. The lost years cannot be recovered, but Sarah has finally found the peace that comes with knowing her children are safe, successful, and surrounded by love. The case stands as a reminder that sometimes the most devastating betrayals come from those we trust most, and that the truth, however painful, is always preferable to a lifetime of unanswered questions. Sarah Thompson's 27-year search for her daughters has ended, but her work advocating for missing children continues, now informed by the knowledge that sometimes the greatest danger to children comes not from strangers, but from family members who believe they know what's best. Emma, Sophia, and Isabella Rodriguez Pemberton were never truly missing. They were hidden in plain sight by someone who thought love justified the ultimate betrayal.